A green solution became the world's death sentence. By 2042, the plastic-eating bacteria didn't stop there. They began to consume humanity itself. Amid the ruin and lies, a metalworker haunted by the past, and a scientist holding a final secret stand defiant. What can they possibly save in a London that has sunk too deep into the black mire? Part 1, The Beginning. Samir Khan and a World Without Plastic. Samir Khan stirred awake in his cramped shack on London's outskirts, faint dawn light slipping through the rusted metal roof, casting jagged shadows on the timber walls. The air reeked of black mire, the decayed remains of plastic dissolved by Plastivor 9 over 12 years. A viscous sludge, black as tar with streaks of oily grey and faint, sickly yellow swirls, clinging to every surface like a living thing, seeping into the cracks of the shack, staining the edges of Samir's boots and matting his dark hair with its residue. Its smell was a layered assault, a sharp, acrid sting like vinegar mixed with the rancid rot of a corpse left in the sun, underpinned by a metallic tang that burned the back of his throat with every breath, an inescapable reminder of a world that had crumbled. Ayesha's coughs echoed from the corner, a dry, grating rasp like the scrape of a rusted gear in a shattered machine, each one a jagged spike in Samir's chest, her frail form shivering on a bed of salvaged timber and hand-woven linen, the only material the bacteria couldn't devour. Samir, 28, sat up, his hands a patchwork of scars from his metalworker trade, the burns crisscrossing his palms like a map of survival, the skin rough and puckered, each mark a memory of molten metal and desperate days. He checked his canvas boots, his fingers brushing the coarse stitches with a trembling urgency, his heart pounding with a raw, primal fear. One tear, one frayed thread, and Plastivor 9 would seep in, bringing the same slow, agonizing death that took his sister Amina 2 years ago, the thought sending a cold sweat down his spine, his breath catching as he traced the seams for any sign of weakness. It was 2042. 12 years since Plastivor 9 was unleashed as a green solution to microplastic pollution. As he checked his boots, a memory flickered, his family scrimping for a smartwatch in the late 2020s, its sleek plastic band a symbol of hope, feeding health data to EcoSynth with the promise of care. But that promise had turned to ash. Ayesha's cough pulled him deeper into the past, the smartwatch's betrayal unfolding in sharp fragments. EcoSynth had used Amina's data to jack up her premiums, citing her microplastic risk, their cold notifications a death sentence for a family already on the edge. When sores spread across her skin, her coughs turning to gasps, hospitals, lacking plastic syringes, ventilators, anything, could only offer a bed to die in, their corridors a cacophony of despair, the air thick with the stench of unwashed bodies and fading hope. Samir had smashed the smartwatch after her death, slamming it against the shack's wall with a guttural scream, the shards scattering across the muddy floor like broken dreams, a jagged scar on his memory, his fists clenching now as the rage surged anew, his teeth grinding with the bitter truth. They knew it would go wrong, and they did it anyway, the thought afire in his chest, his knuckles whitening as he gripped the edge of his bed. Samir stepped out, the stench of mire hitting him like a wave as a lorry's metal wheels screeched past. A world stripped bare of plastic, where food spoiled quickly in linen wraps, hunger a constant gnaw in the slums, and phones he dreamed of were rusted shells, their circuits dissolved, communication reduced to runners and smoke signals. The slum buzzed with a gritty resilience. Shacks of timber and scrap metal lined muddy paths, their roofs sagging under the weight of scavenged sheets, the air thick with the smoke of small fires where people boiled water in dented metal pots, the faint sizzle of roots cooking a rare melody. Children darted between shacks, kicking a ball of tightly bound linen, their laughter sharp and fleeting, their bare feet caked with mire, their hands clutching sticks to prod at the mud for scraps, bits of metal, a shard of glass, anything to trade. The hum of survival was punctuated by the clatter of metal bartering, a woman's sharp cry as she haggled over a linen-wrapped bundle, and the distant wail of a baby, its hunger a universal language in this broken world. Storytellers preserved history for those who'd never known plastic, their voices rising like beacons in the grey dawn. At Trafalgar Square, its lion statues buried in black mire, now a rubbish dump, a storyteller. An elderly woman with a face like crumpled leather, her grey hair tied back with a linen strip, her hands gnarled but expressive, sat on a crate, her gravelly voice a warm contrast to the cold morning air, drawing a semicircle of dirt-smudged children, their eyes wide with wonder. Plastic was the villain, she said, her tone low and ominous, as if conjuring a demon, a creeping beast that choked the rivers, poisoned the fish, and lived in our blood, until Plastivore 9 swallowed it whole, and us with it. She paused, tossing a dried twig into the fire, its crackle punctuating her tale, the children leaning closer, their breaths visible in the chill air, captivated by a world they'd never known. Another tale followed, whispered among the adults. A group called the Metal Faith patrolled the routes beyond the slum, their chants a quiet hum in the distance, their belief in steel a shield against the chaos, protectors of those who dared to travel the broken roads. Ayesha's cough grew worse, and Samir knelt beside her, his heart heavy with a familiar helplessness. I queued at the chippy on Fridays, she rasped, her eyes distant with memory, her voice a fragile thread, her hands, once nimble from years of sewing, now trembling as she clutched the blanket, a woman who'd always found joy in small rituals. Fish and chips in plastic trays, so cheap, so easy. We'd sit by the Thames, you and Amina giggling as the gulls swooped for your chips. Your dad would tell stories of his days at the docks, unloading crates of oranges from Spain, their scent so bright it'd make you sneeze. We'd watch the boats glide past, their horns a low song in the evening air, and I'd sip my tea. Proper tea, from a plastic packet, steeped in a mug with a handle, not this linen-wrapped nonsense. Her words painted a London Samir barely remembered, a time of simple joys now drowned in the black mire, the Thames now a graveyard of fish and forgotten dreams. He squeezed her hand, his voice soft but firm, the warmth of her fingers a lifeline. "I'll bring something back, Mum, I promise." Ayesha managed a weak smile, her faith in him a quiet strength that bolstered his resolve. Her eyes, still bright despite her frailty, a mirror of the mother who'd once danced with him in the rain. Outside, a Metal Faith group gathered near a rusted lorry, their leader, Jonah, a wiry man with a fervent gaze, his face weathered by years of survival, chanting before an engraved metal sheet, a large, polished slab etched with swirling patterns that resembled a storm, the symbol of their faith, reflecting the weak sunlight like a beacon of endurance. "Steel is eternal," Jonah chanted, his voice a fervent hymn, rising and falling like a prayer. "Born of fire, unyielding to the bacteria's hunger, our shield, our salvation. Let it forge our new dawn, let it guard us from the unseen rot." The believers, men and women with gaunt faces, their clothes patched with linen, raised metal tokens, pendants shaped like tiny shields, rings hammered from scraps of steel clutched like talismans, their prayers a desperate plea for protection against the bacteria that had stripped their world bare, their faith rooted in the fear of Plastivore 9's invisible threat, a belief that metal, the bacteria's only foe, could save them where science had failed. Samir paused to watch, a mix of awe and unease stirring in his chest, his fingers brushing the canvas of his boots, as if the bacteria might strike at any moment. Jonah caught his eye and gave a solemn nod, a silent acknowledgement of their shared struggle, a gesture that carried the weight of a promise, to endure, to fight, to survive, before returning to the chant, his voice a storm over the slum's quiet hum. Samir passed Trafalgar Square, its lion statues buried in black mire, now a rubbish dump, the once proud landmark a graveyard of memories, the air heavy with the stench of rot and the faint crackle of a fire. The storyteller's voice drew him closer, her hands weaving the air as she spoke, her eyes alight with the memory of a lost world. "We had proper tea," she said, her tone warm yet tinged with sorrow. Plastic packets, boiled in electric kettles on a Sunday afternoon with biscuits on the side. Custard creams, your Nan's favourite, their scent sweet and buttery, the tea leaves smelling of earth and warmth, a comfort we'd share by the window, watching the rain. The children nodded, their imaginations struggling to grasp the world she described, a world of convenience and comfort that had vanished before they were born. Their small hands clutching linen scraps as if they could conjure the warmth of that lost ritual. Samir lingered for a moment, the storyteller's words a bittersweet echo of Ayesha's memory, a reminder of traditions reshaped by necessity, the scent of her fire a faint comfort in the desolation. Old Mary spotted him and shuffled over, her hands gnarled and spotted with age, the knuckles swollen from years of scavenging, clutching a linen wrap of wilted vegetables, her eyes sharp beneath a frayed scarf, her voice rough but laced with a survivor's wisdom. "Here, lad," she said, pressing the bundle into his hands with a firm grip, her fingers lingering as if to pass on her strength. "Mind the puddles out there. They'll eat through those boots faster than you can blink, leave you screaming like my old man did when the bacteria got his leg. And watch out for the Metal Kings. They clashed with synth guards near the old tube station yesterday, left a mess of blood and metal in their wake." Her voice dropped to a whisper, a conspiratorial glint in her eye, her breath warm against the cold air. "I found a bit of metal there once, back when my boys were still with me, hammered it into a pot, kept my stew warm for a whole night, their little faces lighting up as they ate, the warmth a shield against the famine that took them anyway." Her voice cracked on the last word, a flicker of grief in her eyes, but she straightened, her jaw set with the resilience of someone who'd survived too much to break. Samir nodded, grateful for the tip, the weight of her loss a quiet echo of his own, her small act of kindness a rare light in the darkness. He headed towards the rubbish heap near the station, but as he crossed a narrow alley, shouts erupted behind him, sharp and guttural, slicing through the slum's hum. Metal Kings, a gang that controlled the slum's metal trade, surged from the shadows, their leader a hulking figure with a face scarred like a battlefield, his eyes glinting with a predator's hunger, his leather vest patched with metal plates that clinked with every step, his men trailing behind, their hands gripping makeshift weapons, metal pipes, jagged blades, a chain that rattled ominously. The leader waved a forged knife, its blade etched with crude, swirling patterns, the handle wrapped in linen stained with dried blood, its edge catching the dim light with a menacing gleam. "Hand over the can, slum rat!" he snarled, his voice a low growl, his breath visible in the cold air, "or I'll carve your name into your mum's bones. We need that metal. Ecosynth took everything, left us to starve, and we'll take what's ours." The gang's brutality stemmed from betrayal. Ecosynth's promises of aid had turned to exile, forcing them into a ruthless hierarchy where metal meant survival, their desperation a mirror of the slum's decay. Samir's heart raced, his grip tightening on the metal water can, his voice steady despite the fear coiling in his gut. "It's for my mum," he said, then bolted, weaving through the maze of shacks, his boots pounding the muddy ground, the mire splashing up to his knees, cold and slick, his breath coming in sharp, ragged gasps, the air burning his lungs as he ducked under a sagging roof, the timber grazing his shoulder, the shouts of the Metal Kings echoing behind him, their footsteps heavy and relentless. He dove between two rusted lorries, their metal frames groaning as he pressed himself against them, the cold biting into his back, his chest heaving, the stench of decay thick in his throat, until their shouts faded into the distance, leaving him trembling, the can still clutched in his shaking hands, the weight of survival a heavy burden on his shoulders. When he reached the rubbish heap, a sprawling expanse of black mire and shattered remnants, he sat down, his hands trembling from the chase, the air heavy with the stench of rot and the faint buzz of flies. Memories of Amina flooded back, her laughter like a melody, the songs she'd learned from storytellers a bright thread in the slum's grey tapestry, her small hand in his as they'd scavenged together, her voice a whisper of hope in the darkness. "I'm sorry, Amina," he whispered, tears falling silently, his grief a rusted gear grinding in his chest, each turn a reminder of his failure to save her, his fingers digging into the mud as if he could claw back the past, the despair a weight that threatened to crush him. He felt the world wasn't worth saving, but then his fingers brushed against a scrap of paper buried in the debris, its edges worn, but the ink still legible. Plastivore 9 isn't the solution. They knew it would mutate. Find Ellie Harper, she knows the truth. The words hit him like a jolt, his breath catching, his despair shifting to a burning resolve as he clutched the paper, the rough texture grounding him, the names of Ayesha and Amina echoing in his mind, their faces a beacon in the darkness. He glanced towards the synth-safe zone, its gleaming metal towers a stark contrast to the slum's decay, where the wealthy lived with clean water and food stored in costly glass containers, their lives preserved by material designers and AI health engineers. Samir knew he didn't belong in that world, but he resolved to leave the slum and find Ellie Harper, even if it meant risking his life. The paper a lifeline he couldn't ignore. His jaw set with a determination that burned brighter than his grief. Part 2. Rising Action. The Journey of Resistance. Samir trudged the muddy M25, once a bustling highway, now a desolate stretch of cracked asphalt littered with the husks of abandoned lorries, their metal frames rusted and warped, half sunk into the mire, the road's edges fringed with skeletal trees, their branches clawing at the grey sky. His boots sank into the mire with every step, the sludge sucking at his soles, his eyes darting for deadly puddles that shimmered with an oily, iridescent sheen, swirls of green and violet dancing on their surface, a deceptive beauty hiding their lethal nature, the bacteria within waiting to devour flesh as easily as plastic. He clutched a metal water can and linen-wrapped vegetables, his knuckles white, his body tense, every muscle coiled as he scanned the horizon, his breath shallow, his ears straining for the faintest sound. Synth guards or metal kings could strike any time, their presence a shadow over the desolate road, his heart thudding with every creak of the wind through the trees. The air reeked of decay, a layered stench that coated his throat. The sour rot of plastic residue, the acrid burn of distant metal fires where scavengers melted scraps for trade, and a faint, earthy undertone of damp soil struggling to breathe beneath the mire. Each breath a reminder of the world's collapse. Shouts rang out behind him, sharp and urgent, and he dove behind a rusted lorry, its metal wheels warped and jagged, scraping his arm as he pressed himself against it, the cold biting into his skin. A group of plastic dwellers ran past, their faces etched with panic, their linen clothes torn and stained, chased by a squad of synth guards whose metal boots clanged like a death knell, their visors reflecting the grey light with a cold, unfeeling gleam. One man stumbled, his cry a raw, animal scream as a synth guard fired a metal arrow, the tip piercing his chest with a sickening thud, his body crumpling into the mire, blood blooming like a dark flower, mixing with the sludge in a glistening pool. The guards marching on without a glance, their silence a chilling testament to their brutality. Samir held his breath, his heart pounding like a drum, his fingers digging into the lorry's rusted edge, waiting until their steps faded, the man's final scream echoing in his ears, a stark reminder of the stakes he carried. As night fell, the air grew colder, a biting chill that seeped into his bones, the sky a heavy shroud of grey, the moonlight casting eerie shadows across the desolate road. A rustling in the bushes stopped him cold, his breath catching, his hand tightening on the can as two bacteria hunters emerged. Their sores glowing faintly in the moonlight, a sickly red that pulsed like embers, dotting their arms and necks, their gaunt faces hollow with desperation. Their eyes glinting with a mix of exhaustion and menace. One man's gaze so hollow it seemed to pierce through Samir, the other's twitching with a feral hunger. "Lost, slum boy?" The first growled, hefting a metal club, his voice a rasp, his lips cracked and bleeding, the sores on his face oozing a faint, yellowish pus that caught the moonlight. Samir backed away, his heart racing, his boots slipping slightly in the mire, his voice steady but low. "Just passing through," he said, his eyes locked on the club, his body poised to run. The second hunter, a younger man with a face like a skull, his sores fresher, their glow brighter, muttered, "Leave him. We've got clean soil to find before the sores take us, before they crawl into our bones and turn us to dust." His voice cracked with despair, his hands trembling as he clutched a tattered linen map, the desperation in his eyes a mirror of the world's decay, his words a haunting echo of a life on the edge. The first hunter grunted, losing interest, and they disappeared into the shadows, their footsteps fading, leaving Samir shaken. The reality of their trade, a desperate gamble for survival, sinking in deeper, the glow of their sores lingering in his vision like a warning. Near a crumbling overpass, its concrete cracked and stained with black residue, a small fire flickered in the distance, its orange glow a rare warmth in the darkness, the faint crackle of burning wood a beacon in the night. Samir approached cautiously, his boots silent on the mud. finding Daniel, a storyteller, seated on a broken slab, his face weathered and lined, his grey beard streaked with dirt, his eyes alight with a quiet fire, his hands gesturing as he spoke to a small group of travellers huddled against the cold, their faces gaunt but rapt. "Hope's alive," Daniel growled, his voice rough but warm, weaving a tale by the fire's light, his tone a mix of gravel and honey, drawing them in like a song. "Somewhere out there, a scientist, Ellie Harper, and a slum metal worker are defying ecosynth, forging a cure to end this curse. They'll bring back the world we lost, mark my words, they'll carve a path through the mire." His words carried a quiet conviction, a hint of mystery, as if he knew more than he let on, the fire casting shadows across his face, illuminating the scars on his knuckles, marks of a man who'd fought to survive. He paused, his gaze drifting to the shadows, and added, "Even in the synth safe zone, they say some are turning against ecosynth, material designers, engineers, haunted by what they've done." Samir lingered in the shadows, listening as Daniel's words stirred something in him, a spark of purpose, a reminder that he wasn't alone in this fight, the fire's crackle a counterpoint to the night's oppressive silence. Daniel glanced his way, his eyes sharp and knowing, a flicker of recognition passing between them, as if he sensed Samir's role in the tale he wove, before turning back to his listeners, leaving Samir with a sense of destiny he couldn't shake. After 3 days of grueling travel, his boots caked with mud and his body aching from the relentless pace, Samir reached Epping Forest, following tree carvings left by other survivors to a hidden camp deep in the woods, the air heavy with the scent of damp earth and pine, the faint rustle of leaves overhead, a stark contrast to the desolation of the M25, the moonlight filtering through the canopy in silvery streaks, casting dappled patterns on the forest floor. Ellie Harper, a gaunt woman of 34 with haunted eyes, deep-set and shadowed, their green irises flecked with grief, stood in a shack of timber and scrap metal, gripping a forged knife, its blade catching the firelight from a small blaze in the corner, her movements sharp and wary, her body coiled like a spring, her linen shirt patched and stained, her dark hair pulled back in a tight braid, strands escaping to frame her pale, hollow face. "Who are you?" she snapped, her voice sharp with suspicion, the blade glinting as she angled it towards him, her stance that of a hunted animal, her breath visible in the cold air of the shack. Samir held up the scrap of paper, his hands steady despite the exhaustion weighing him down. "I'm Samir. Found this. You're Ellie Harper?" Her eyes widened, then narrowed, the knife still raised, her knuckles white around the handle. "Ecosynth spy?" she hissed, her tone cold, her gaze darting to the shadows as if expecting an ambush. "Your bacteria killed my sister," Samir shot back, his voice raw with anger, his fists clenching at his sides, "and my mum's dying back home. I risked everything to find you." Ellie flinched, her knife wavering, her expression softening as guilt flickered in her gaze, her shoulders slumping slightly, the weight of her own losses mirrored in his words. I lost my son, Jack," she murmured, her voice trembling, her eyes glistening with unshed tears, the knife lowering as she stepped back, the firelight casting her shadow against the wall. They sat by the fire, the warmth easing the forest's chill, the crackle of the flames a comforting rhythm, and Ellie brewed tea with loose leaves wrapped in linen, the faint, earthy scent of the leaves rising as she poured the steaming liquid into 2 metal cups, her hands steady despite the tremor in her fingers. The act a ritual of normalcy in a world turned upside down, the cups' edges dented but warm against their palms, a small anchor in the chaos. She spoke of Jack, her 7-year-old son, her voice breaking as she clutched the cup, the steam rising like a veil over her grief. "He held my hand," she said, her eyes distant, his small fingers so warm, asking, "Mummy, will I be okay?" after a simple surgery. But the hospital had no plastic equipment, no tubes, no gloves, nothing. He faded in my arms, his breath so faint, his eyes searching mine for a promise I couldn't keep. Tears slipped down her cheeks, her voice a whisper, the guilt a weight she couldn't shed, her fingers tightening around the cup until her knuckles whitened. Samir listened, his own grief rising to the surface like a tide, his chest tight as he spoke of Amina, his voice raw, his hands gripping his cup as if it could hold him together. "She was my light," he said, his voice cracking, her laughter a melody, singing songs she learned from storytellers, her small hand in mine as we scavenged. I promised to protect her, but the bacteria took her, slowly, painfully, her coughs like Ayesha's now, her songs silenced by sores I couldn't stop. Ellie reached out, her hand trembling as she touched his shoulder, her touch tentative but warm, her eyes full of empathy, the shared loss forging a fragile bond, the tea's warmth a small comfort as they sat in the flickering light, their grief a bridge between them, their resolve a shared flame. Ellie unrolled a linen map, her fingers trembling as she traced the outline of central London, her voice thick with anger, her words spilling out in fragments, each one laced with a bitter edge. Ecosynth. They knew, she said, her voice breaking, her finger jabbing at the map, the paper crinkling under her touch. God, they knew Plastivor 9 would mutate, knew it'd turn on us. She clenched her fist, her knuckles whitening, her jaw tight as she fought back tears, her voice rising with a raw, seething fury. But they released it anyway, all for profit, those bloody glass containers, the alloys, sold to the synth-safe elite while we rot out here. She shoved a bundle of linen notes towards Samir, her handwriting scrawled with urgency, her breath hitching as she spoke, her eyes flashing with a mix of rage and guilt. The zone law, it was their doing too. After the economy collapsed, the government handed London to Ecosynth. They run it now, synth guards, health scores, exiling anyone who can't pay, leaving us to die. Her voice cracked, her hands trembling as she gripped the map, the firelight casting shadows across her face, her anger a storm that mirrored Samir's own, the truth a bitter weight between them. She pulled out a glass vial, its pale green liquid glowing softly, like moonlight on water, the glass cool and smooth in her hands, a fragile hope in a world of despair. This is the counter-bacteria, she said, her voice softening, a flicker of hope in her eyes. I've been working on it for 2 years. It can destroy Plastivor 9, but we need the original sample from their headquarters, and we need to release it at London's biggest dump, where the bacteria's strongest. Samir nodded, the weight of the mission settling on his shoulders, his resolve hardening as he met her gaze. I'll help you, he said, his voice steady, the names of Amina and Jack a quiet vow in his mind. How do we get in? Ellie pointed to the map, her finger lingering on a steel fortress in central London, her voice steadier now but still tinged with urgency. Fiona Grant, my old boss, she said, her tone clipped. She's an AI health engineer. She's not like the rest of them. She hates what Ecosynth's become. If we can get to her, we've got a chance. Samir wasn't convinced. Fiona was a synth safe, part of a world that had turned its back on people like him, but he had no other choice. The vial's glow a faint promise in the firelight. When do we start? He asked, his voice low, his hands tightening around the cup. Now, Ellie replied, grabbing the vial, her movements swift, her jaw set with determination. The bacteria's in our blood now, microplastics. It's attacking us, Samir. No one's safe, not you, not me, not anyone. Her words were a cold jolt, the stakes a heavy weight, but Samir nodded, the faces of Amina and Jack a fire that drove him forward, their shared loss a bond that carried them into the night. A bacteria hunter named Tom stumbled into the camp, his arms marked with glowing sores, their red light pulsing like a heartbeat, his face gaunt and hollow, his eyes sunken with despair, his voice a rasp as he spoke, his linen shirt torn, revealing the extent of his infection, sores that wept a yellowish fluid, his skin pale and clammy, his hands trembling as he clutched a metal canteen. The river's a graveyard, he said, his voice trembling, his eyes wide with a hollow fear. No fish, no life, just black water and death. Brazil, I heard it's burning over metal scraps, cities turned to ash, screams echoing across the ocean. He paused, his breath hitching, his voice dropping to a whisper. I started hunting after my wife died, thought I could find clean soil, save someone, but it's too late for me. His words carried a deep, hollow despair, the weight of a world on the brink, his confession a raw wound. The urgency of their mission a sharp blade in Samir's chest, Ellie's face tightening with fear, her hands clutching the vial tighter, the glow a faint hope against the darkness Tom described, his past a quiet echo of their own losses. They took back routes through abandoned areas to avoid patrols, their steps cautious but determined, the landscape a patchwork of decay. Rusted lorries half buried in mud, their wheels warped and jagged. Shattered glass from long-gone windows crunching underfoot, the air filled with the distant wail of a scavenger calling for trade. Metal for linen, glass for food. His voice a desperate cry in the desolation, the faint clatter of his cart a mournful rhythm. Synthguard's boots echoed in the distance, their metal weapons glinting in the fading light, the sound a cold reminder of the danger that stalked them. A shadow moved ahead. Jonah, the metal faith leader, his engraved pendant catching the last rays of the sun, his presence a quiet relief, his group known to patrol these routes, their faith a shield for survivors, a whisper Samir had heard in the slums now a reality. "This way," Jonah whispered, leading them to a hidden shack concealed by overgrown brambles, the air inside damp and heavy with the scent of moss, his voice fervent but grounded, his eyes scanning the shadows. "We guard these paths. Steel guides us to shelter those who fight the rot, those who carry hope against ecosynth's decay." His words were a vow, his faith born from loss. His brother, taken by plastivore 9 years ago, his body devoured by sores, driving Jonah to see the fight as a holy war, metal their sacred weapon against the bacteria's curse. Samir hesitated, his mistrust of such beliefs warring with his gratitude, his hand brushing the can as if to anchor himself, but Ellie nodded, trusting the faith, her hand on the vial, a quiet vow. They hid until the guards passed, Jonah's presence a reminder of the community's resilience, his faith a thread of hope in the darkness, Samir's mixed feelings a quiet storm, gratitude for the safety, unease at the zeal that drove Jonah, his pendant a symbol of a belief Samir couldn't fully embrace. At a crumbling bridge over a stagnant stream, its waters thick with black residue, the surface shimmering with a faint glow of dead fish, their scales stained with the bacteria's residue, Ellie paused, her guilt over Jack surfacing like a wave, her hands clutching the metal box with the vial, her fingers tracing its edges as if seeking absolution, her eyes staring into the water's dark mirror, reflecting her haunted face. "What if I'm wrong again?" she whispered, her voice trembling, her breath visible in the cold air. "What if this counterbacteria makes things worse? I can't bear another death on my hands. Jack's already too much." Samir gripped her arm, his voice steady, his own grief lending strength to his words, his eyes locked on hers. "We're doing this for Jack, for Amina, for everyone we've lost. We can't stop now, Ellie. If we don't try, who will?" Ellie nodded, her eyes glistening with tears, her resolve hardening, their shared loss forging a trust that carried them forward. The bridge's decay a mirror of the world they fought to save, the vial's glow a faint promise in the fading light. Part 3. Climax. The battle at the rubbish dump. Samir and Ellie reached central London's synth-safe zone, a fortress of gleaming metal towers rising above the slum's ruins, their polished surfaces reflecting the weak sunlight like a cruel mirror. The air clean and sterile, a stark contrast to the slum's rancid stench, the towers' smooth lines and glass panels a symbol of wealth, their tops disappearing into the low clouds, untouchable and cold. Water filtration systems hummed, a low, mechanical drone that underscored the zone's order, the sound a constant reminder of the luxury the slums could never afford, and robotic patrols glided by, their glowing sensors a soft blue, their movements silent and precise, a luxury beyond the plastic dwellers' reach, their presence a cold barrier between worlds. Samir felt out of place, his muddy boots leaving faint tracks on the pristine metal walkway, his linen shirt patched and stained, the clean air tasting wrong in his lungs, the towers looming over him like a judgment, a world that had turned its back on him and his kind. They sought out Fiona Grant, who lived in a posh flat on the 15th floor, her woven alloy suit shimmering like liquid silver, its threads catching the light with every movement, her flat a sterile space of glass and metal. Glass tables, glass shelves lined with decorative vials, the air faintly scented with synthetic citrus, a mockery of the natural world below. Her face was pale, her blonde hair pulled back tightly, her blue eyes heavy with guilt, her hands trembling as she closed the door, her fingers, long and elegant, nails perfectly manicured, shaking as she clutched the edge of a glass table, the surface reflecting her strained expression. "I built the health scores," she whispered, her voice breaking, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I sent kids to the slums with a click, kids who begged, who screamed, their faces haunting me every night, their cries echoing in my dreams. I can't carry this guilt anymore." Ellie met her gaze, a mix of anger and hope in her eyes, her voice firm but not unkind. "You can make amends, Fiona. Help us get the original bacteria sample from EcoSynth's headquarters and release the counter-bacteria into London's largest rubbish dump. Will you help us?" Fiona nodded, her resolve hardening, her jaw set, a flicker of determination breaking through her despair, her voice steadier as she spoke, her hands stilling on the table. "I'll help. Not for me, but for all the people I've let down, for the lives I've destroyed." Fiona provided them with an access card, her fingers trembling as she handed it over, and detailed intel on EcoSynth's security systems, her voice clipped and urgent, her knowledge a lifeline in their desperate mission. But as they finalized their plan, she froze, her eyes darting to a small device embedded in the wall, a tiny metal disc, its red light blinking ominously, a cold reminder of EcoSynth's reach. "They've heard everything," she warned, panic flashing in her eyes, her hands fumbling as she grabbed her coat, the fabric rustling as she moved, the air suddenly thick with tension, their window of opportunity slamming shut. They had to act immediately, the sound of their own breaths loud in the sterile flat, the urgency a cold weight in their chests. They infiltrated EcoSynth's headquarters under the cover of night, slipping past the first layer of security with Fiona's access card, their movements swift and silent, the building a colossal metal structure that loomed like a fortress, its walls cold and unyielding, engraved with tablets boasting the corporation's achievements. EcoSynth, ending plastic pollution 2030, a new era of sustainability, the words etched in sharp, angular letters, their irony a bitter taste in Samir's mouth, the building's sterile gleam, a stark contrast to the slum's decay, its presence a physical manifestation of the enemy they faced. Samir's heart pounded as they reached the lab on the 20th floor, a sterile space of gleaming metal and glass, the air cold and sharp with the scent of chemicals, the fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows, illuminating rows of metal fridges and glass cabinets, the hum of machinery a constant drone in the background. Ellie retrieved the sample, a vial of red-orange liquid, its colour vibrant and menacing, like liquid fire, a stark contrast to the pale green of her counter-bacteria, and combined them in a makeshift glass vial, her hands steady despite the tremor in her fingers, her movements precise, the scientist in her taking over even as fear lingered in her eyes. The two liquids swirling together with a faint shimmer, a promise of redemption in their union. "It's done," she whispered, her voice a mix of relief and fear, her eyes meeting Samir's with a flicker of hope, the vial's glow a beacon in the sterile lab. But before they could leave, an alarm blared, its shrill, piercing wail shattering the silence, a deafening assault that echoed through the building, the lights flashing red, casting the lab in a bloody glow, the sound a physical force that made Samir's ears ring, his heart lurching in his chest. Synth guards stormed in, their metal boots clanging against the floor, their weapons glinting under the lights. Metal crossbows, swords forged from scrap, their edges jagged and cruel, their faces hidden behind visors that reflected the flickering alarm lights, their movements precise and relentless, a cold, mechanical force. "Freeze!" one shouted, his voice cold and commanding, a metal arrow notched in his crossbow, the tip glinting with lethal intent. Fiona pushed Samir and Ellie behind her, her voice rising with a desperate courage, her body trembling but her stance firm, her alloy suit shimmering as she moved. "Run, I'll hold them off!" She grabbed a chemical flask from the lab bench, her hands shaking as she hurled it to the floor, the glass shattering with a sharp crack, the chemicals igniting in a burst of flame, a wall of fire erupting with a roar, the heat searing the air, the flames casting wild shadows across the lab, the guards' visors reflecting the inferno. But a synth guard fired his arrow, the metal tip piercing Fiona's chest with a sickening thud, her body jerking back as blood bloomed across her suit, a dark stain against the silver, her gasp a raw, guttural sound as she collapsed, blood pooling on the floor, her eyes wide with shock and pain, her hands clawing at the wound as if she could hold herself together. "Go, finish it." She gasped, her voice a broken whisper, her eyes locking on Samir's, a plea and a command, her life slipping away as the flames flickered, her sacrifice a searing brand in Samir's memory, a debt he could never repay. As he and Ellie fled through the emergency stairwell, the vial clutched tightly in Ellie's trembling hands. the sound of Fiona's final breath echoing in his ears. They ran through London's abandoned streets, once bustling with life, now desolate and eerie under the moonlight, the air thick with the stench of decay, the faint clang of metal on metal, a haunting reminder of the city's fall. The streets lined with the husks of old shops, their windows shattered, their signs rusted and illegible. An old electronics shop stood silently by the road, its phones and computers dissolved, leaving only rusted metal shells, their screens long dark, a metal sign hanging out front, its engraved letters barely legible, in memory of the tech age, 2030. Samir paused, a sharp pain in his chest, the sight pulling him into a memory, a boyhood dream of owning a phone, saving every scrap to buy one, imagining its weight in his hand, the glow of its screen a connection to a world beyond the slum, a dream now as dead as the city around him, the rusted shells a graveyard of hope. His fingers brushing the sign as if he could touch the past. They reached London's largest rubbish dump, a sprawling expanse that had once held millions of tons of plastic, now a stinking sea of black residue, the air so thick with the stench of rot it coated Samir's throat like tar, a rancid mix of decay and chemicals, the ground beneath their feet slick and uneven, littered with jagged metal scraps, the bones of fish and small animals protruding from the mire, their skeletons stained with the bacteria's residue, the faint buzz of flies a constant drone in the background, the expanse stretching endlessly under the moonlight, a festering wound in the earth. Ellie opened the vial, pouring the pale green liquid onto the ground, her hands trembling with the weight of their mission, the liquid seeping into the residue with a faint hiss, its glow spreading like a soft tide, a sacred moment of hope in a world of despair. The air shimmering with its light, a promise of healing that felt almost holy, Ellie's breath catching as she watched it spread, her eyes alight with a fragile faith. "It'll spread quickly," she said, her voice faint with exhaustion, her eyes scanning the dump as if she could see the change, the glow a beacon in the darkness. Their hope was short-lived. A larger squad of synth guards appeared, surrounding them from all sides, their metal boots crunching against the residue, the sound a cold rhythm, their weapons raised with lethal intent, crossbows notched, swords drawn, a chain whip rattling ominously, their visors reflecting the moonlight like unfeeling eyes, their movements a coordinated dance of death, the air growing colder with their presence, the dump's stench a bitter shroud around them. EcoSynth broadcast a message across the city on the few remaining metal public screens, their cold, robotic voice echoing through the night, a chilling proclamation that turned Samir's blood to ice, the sound reverberating off the rusted remnants of the city, a relentless drone that carried their lies. Samir Khan and Ellie Harper are environmental terrorists. They sabotaged our green solution, causing millions of deaths. Don't let them deceive you. Plastivore 9 is the future. In the synth-safe zone, Clara, material designer, watched the message, her hands trembling as she clutched the edge of her glass table, her health score flagged for review. Another drop and she'd be exiled, her life unravelling like so many others. She'd heard Daniel's tale on the road weeks ago, the whispered rebellion of a scientist and a metalworker, and found a forbidden linen note in the lab. EcoSynth lies. Plastivore 9 was never safe. Its words haunting her, fueling her doubt, her fear of exile now a fire that drove her to act. Seeing Samir and Ellie's names, her breath caught, her heart pounding as fear and resolve warred within her, her fingers tightening on the table, her voice a whisper as she made her choice. I can't let them win. She slipped the note to a slum runner, her heart racing as she passed it through a crack in the zone's perimeter, the runner's shadow darting away, her whisper a desperate plea. Find them. The risk a cold weight in her chest, her breath catching as she watched him disappear, knowing her life hung in the balance, her defiance a spark in the darkness. At the dump, Ellie collapsed, clutching her chest, her breathing ragged as she fell to her knees in the black residue, her body trembling, her skin pale as ash, red sores spreading across her arms, their glow a sickly contrast to her fading vitality. Her breaths coming in shallow gasps, each one a struggle, her eyes wide with fear and determination. "Ellie!" Samir shouted, kneeling to support her, his hands shaking as he held her up, his voice raw with desperation, his heart lurching as he felt her weaken. the sores a cruel mirror of Amina's fate. "No, not now," Ellie whispered, her voice barely audible, her eyes glistening with tears as she gripped Samir's hand, her fingers cold and trembling, her breath a faint whisper. "You have to carry on, Samir. Save them, for Jack, for Amina, for everyone," she pleaded, her voice breaking, her eyes searching his, a desperate plea etched into her fading gaze. "I'm sorry, Jack. I tried." Her hand fell limp, her eyes closing, her body still in the moonlight, a quiet end to a fight that had consumed her, her final breath a soft sigh that lingered in the air, the dump stench a bitter shroud around her. Samir's chest burned, Amina's laughter echoing with Ellie's plea, a vow he'd carry to his grave, his grief a storm that broke him, a raw scream tearing from his throat, his hands clutching her lifeless form, the mire seeping into his knees, the cold a cruel echo of her absence, his tears mixing with the sludge as the synth guards closed in, their metal cords binding his wrists, dragging him away, his cries swallowed by the night, the vial's glow a faint hope in the darkness as Ellie hid her research under a jagged metal scrap, its surface catching the moonlight a final act of defiance. Part 4. Open ending. A fragile hope. Samir was taken to an ecosynth detention facility, a fortress of metal on the outskirts of London, its walls cold and unyielding, the air heavy with the scent of rust and despair, the darkness pressing in like a living thing, the faint drip of water from a leaking pipe, a relentless rhythm, each drop a reminder of time slipping away, the cold seeping into his bones, the metal chains biting into his wrists, their edges rough and rusted, leaving red marks on his skin. Red sores spread on his arms, their glow a sickly red, the heat of them a burning torment, each one a sharp, pulsing pain, like embers beneath his skin, spreading with every hour, his vision blurring as the infection took hold, his breath shallow, his body trembling with the effort to stay conscious. But his thoughts were a lifeline. Ellie's final words, Ayesha's smile, the slum's resilient hum, their faces vivid in his mind, Amina's laughter a melody that kept him from breaking, Ayesha's stories of the Thams a quiet strength, the community's survival a fire that burned in his chest, a vow to endure, to fight, to honor their memory, even as his body failed. The counter-bacteria spread through the dump, a silent force of redemption, its pale green glow seeping through the residue like a gentle tide, the black mire slowly transforming, patches turning to natural brown soil rich and loamy, its scent earthy and clean, a stark contrast to the rancid decay, the first sign of life returning after over a decade, blades of grass sprouting in the moonlight, their green a miracle in the desolation, the air clearing with the faint scent of renewal, a quiet promise of healing. But Ecosynth covered it up, broadcasting a message across the city, their robotic voice cold and unfeeling, echoing through the slums on rusted screens. There lies a twisted narrative that turned hope into fear. Ecosynth has contained the bacteria with advanced technology, protecting humanity from the chaos caused by Samir Khan and Ellie Harper. Do not be deceived by their sabotage. Their grip on the truth was ironclad, their power a shadow over the fragile hope taking root, their broadcast a chilling reminder of their control. Daniel slipped into the facility, his knowledge of forgotten paths guiding him through the shadows, his steps silent on the cold metal floor, his breath shallow as he navigated the labyrinth of corridors, the faint clank of a guard's boot in the distance a constant threat, his heart pounding as he moved, his linen cloak blending into the darkness. A man who'd spent years weaving tales, now weaving through danger to save a hero. He reached Samir's cell, his eyes alight with purpose. His hands trembling as he picked the lock with a metal shard, his voice a low whisper in the darkness as he freed Samir from his chains. "Clara, a synth-safe woman, risked everything to pass word of your fight," he whispered, his voice urgent, his hands steady despite the tremor in his fingers. "Storytellers, spread your tale. Heroes fighting Ecosynth, from slum to slum, lighting a fire in those who've lost hope, a movement growing in the shadows. Here's Ellie's paper. Finish it." He handed Samir the linen scrap, its edges worn but its message a beacon. The ink faded, but the words clear, a symbol of the fight they'd shared, the weight of it a vow in Samir's hands, Daniel's words a spark that reignited his resolve, their reunion a quiet storm of emotion, the firelight in Daniel's eyes a mirror of the hope they carried. Samir made his way back to the slum, each step a struggle as the infection spread, his vision blurring, his legs trembling with every movement, the sores burning hotter, his breath shallow, his body a battleground of pain and resolve. The muddy paths slick beneath his boots, the air heavy with the scent of smoke and decay, his heart pounding with the effort to keep going, the paper clutched in his hand a lifeline. He passed a small market, linen weavers trading goods with metal workers, their voices a murmur of survival, the air filled with the scent of boiled roots and the faint clang of metal being forged, a woman's sharp cry as she bartered for a linen wrap, a child's laughter a fleeting melody in the chaos. A bacteria hunter, his arm covered in red sores, their glow a sickly contrast to his pale skin, showed Samir a patch of clean soil he'd found, his voice a mix of pride and resignation. His hands trembling as he held it up, the soil rich and brown, a faint green sprout poking through, a fragile hope in his calloused hands. "Found this near the Thames," he said, his eyes hollow, his voice cracking. "Won't last long, though, not with these sores eating me alive." Samir shook his head, a pang of sorrow for the man's fate, the soil a fleeting glimpse of the future they might never share, the man's despair a mirror of the world's fragility, the sprout a quiet vow to keep fighting. When he reached the slum, he found Ayesha had passed away, her body cold and still on the makeshift bed, her face peaceful in death, a stark contrast to the suffering she'd endured, the faint scent of the linen she'd woven lingering in the air, a reminder of her quiet strength, her hands folded across her chest, the blanket tucked around her as if she'd simply fallen asleep. The stillness a cruel contrast to the vibrant woman who'd once filled the shack with stories. Samir knelt beside her, tears falling silently, his grief a storm that threatened to drown him, a wave of failure crashing over him with relentless force, his hands trembling as he touched her cold fingers, the room filled with the faint scent of the linen she'd woven, a reminder of her quiet strength, his mind replaying her stories of the Thames, the gulls, the life they'd lost, each memory a knife in his heart. "I'm sorry, Mum," he whispered, his voice breaking, the weight of his promise unfulfilled, a burden he could barely bear, his fingers brushing her cheek, the cold a cruel echo of her absence, the paper in his hand a bitter contrast to the loss before him. He sought out a group of young people in the slum, their faces hardened by the harshness of their lives, but their eyes alight with the stories they'd heard from Daniel and other storytellers. Tales of Samir and Ellie, heroes who had defied ecosynth, their names a rallying cry in the firelight, their expressions a mix of awe and determination, their hands clutching linen wraps and metal scraps, ready to fight for a future they'd never known. Among them stood Leela, 12. Her small frame trembling with the weight of what she'd seen, her dark eyes wide with a mix of fear and resolve, her hands clutching a metal pendant from Jonah's faith, its swirl pattern a vow of endurance. Samir knelt before them, his voice weak but resolute, his hands trembling as he pressed the paper into Lila's hands, his eyes locking on hers, the sores on his arms glowing faintly, his breath shallow but his words a vow. Don't let ecosynth win," he rasped, his voice breaking, his body trembling with the effort to speak. "Carry on, for Ayesha, for Amina, for Ellie and Jack, for all of us." The names were a prayer, a torch passed to the next generation, the paper a symbol of the fight they'd shared, its weight a vow in Lila's small hands, her eyes glistening with tears as she nodded, the pendant a cold comfort against her chest, the memory of her brother, his song silenced by sores, his laughter a melody she'd never hear again, a fire that drove her forward, his absence a wound that mirrored Samir's own. Samir collapsed, the infection claiming him, his body sinking into the mud of the slum, but his eyes held a quiet peace, a man who'd given everything, his breath a faint whisper in the still air, his death a quiet tragedy, a hero's end in a world that had taken so much. Lila clutched the paper, her small hands trembling, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and determination, the memory of her brother a raw wound, his songs, learned from storytellers, a bright thread in their shared life, silenced by the sores that had taken him, his laughter a melody she whispered to herself in the dark, a vow to honor his memory, to fight for the world he'd never see. She approached a pile of metal Samir had once forged, her small hands gathering the pieces with a determination that belied her age. her fingers raw and bleeding as she worked, the cold metal biting into her skin, her breath visible in the chill air, her movements steady despite the pain, the pendant hanging from her neck, a quiet vow of endurance. She wove the scraps into a small house, her hands trembling with the effort, the structure rising slowly under the moonlight, a beacon of defiance in the slum's decay, the pendant woven into the roof, its swirl pattern catching the light. A symbol of the metal faith that had sustained them, her brother's memory a fire that drove her forward, the pain in her hands a small price for the hope she built. When the house stood, she carved Samir and Ellie on the roof with a borrowed knife, her hands steady despite the ache, the names gleaming under the moon, a testament to their legacy, a vow to carry their fight forward, her brother's songs echoing in her mind as she worked. Each stroke of the knife a promise to the world they'd fought for. The beacon of hope became a gathering place for the community, a site where people came to pray for a future free of bacteria, their voices rising in a quiet chorus of hope and defiance, the air filled with the scent of burning wood and the faint, earthy smell of the healing soil nearby, the hum of their prayers a melody of resilience, the glow of small fires casting shadows across the metal house, a lighthouse in the storm. On the first evening, Lila stood before the crowd, her voice small but clear, her eyes bright with a fire that mirrored Samir's own, her small hands clutching the pendant as if it could channel their strength, her words carrying the weight of the storyteller's tales, her voice steady despite the tremble in her chest. "They fought for us," she said, gesturing to the names above, her words a vow. "Samir and Ellie gave everything so we could live. We'll keep their fight alive. We'll spread the counter-bacteria, we'll rebuild, and we won't let EcoSynth win." The community nodded, their faces a mix of grief and determination, their prayers rising like smoke into the evening sky, a fragile hope taking root in the soil that was slowly healing, the names Samir and Ellie shining like a beacon, a legend that would endure among the plastic dwellers, a spark that could one day grow into a blaze. A week later, the community gathered again, their numbers swelling as word of the beacon of hope spread, drawn by the promise of a future they could fight for, the air buzzing with a quiet energy, the scent of boiled roots and the faint clang of metal being forged a reminder of their resilience, the glow of the fires a warm contrast to the cold night. A young woman named Kemi, inspired by Jonah's teachings, stepped forward. Her hands clutching a metal token engraved with the same swirl pattern as Lila's pendant, her voice steady as she led a metal faith ritual, her words a chant that echoed Jonah's fervent hymn, her linen cloak patched but clean, her dark eyes alight with purpose, her presence a bridge between faith and resistance. "Steel is eternal," she intoned, her voice rising over the crowd, "our shield, our guide, forged in fire to defy the rot. We honor Samir and Ellie, warriors of the new dawn, their fight blessed by the unyielding metal." The believers raised their tokens, pendants, rings, scraps of steel, their prayers a chorus of resilience, their hands trembling with the weight of their faith, the chant weaving through the air like a thread, binding them together, the ritual a testament to the metal faith that had become a cornerstone of their resistance, their voices a defiant song against the darkening sky, a vow to endure as the metal they worshipped, their faith a shield against the despair that threatened to consume them. But that fragile hope was soon overshadowed by a chilling rumor that spread through the slum like wildfire, a shadow over their newfound resolve, the air growing colder as the news took hold, the fires flickering as if sensing the coming storm. A bacteria hunter, returning from the River Thames, gathered the crowd one evening, his voice trembling as he spoke, his hands shaking with the fear of what he'd witnessed, his face gaunt with the weight of his words, his eyes wide with terror, his linen shirt torn, revealing fresh sores that glowed with a sickly red light. "I saw EcoSynth scientists at the river," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, his hands clutching a metal canteen as if it could anchor him. "They released a new vial, purple it was, shimmering in the water like poison, an unnatural glow that turned my stomach. Fish died in droves right after, floating belly up all the way to Tower Bridge, their scales stained with that eerie hue, the water still and silent like death itself." His words hung in the air, a chilling prophecy, the crowd's murmurs falling silent, the air heavy with the scent of death and something new, something sinister, the fires casting long shadows across their faces, their hope a fragile thing against the looming threat. Lila listened, fear flickering in her young eyes, her small hands clutching the edge of her metal house as she absorbed the weight of his words, the pendant in her pocket a cold reminder of the fight ahead, her brother's songs a faint melody in her mind, a vow to keep fighting, even as the future darkened. She walked to the edge of the slum, her footsteps slow but deliberate, her small frame silhouetted against the fading light, and gazed towards the Thames, where the water shimmered with an eerie purple hue under the setting sun, its surface rippling with an unnatural glow, the air cold and still, the scent of death lingering in the breeze, the purple a harbinger of a new nightmare, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and resolve, the names on the roof above her a silent vow to fight on, the question hanging heavy in the air, had they truly won, or had a new nightmare just begun?